Welcome to The Newsworthy. All the day's news in less than 10 minutes. Fast, fair, fun, and on the go. Today, we're talking about the FBI's highest priority case, a different way to fight climate change, and a new flu treatment. Plus, Uber Eats has a secret. Those stories and many more in less than 10 minutes. And hang out after the news for the Thing to Know Thursday bonus interview. You'll learn the story behind the ex-NFL player who was just released from prison. I'm Erica Mandy. Today is Thursday, October 25th. You ready? Let's do this. We start today with what the FBI is now calling its highest priority investigation. Pipe bombs were sent to several high-profile Democrats this week, as well as CNN's offices in New York City. Thankfully, no one is hurt. The New York Times says the authorities intercepted all of these bombs. They were homemade devices in manila envelopes. It's not clear yet if they were hoax bombs or if they could have actually gone off. Either way, they were sent to former President Barack Obama, former Secretary of State Hillary Clinton, former Attorney General Eric Holder, California Representative Maxine Waters, and CNN's offices in New York City yesterday. And earlier this week to billionaire George Soros, who donates to Democrats and their causes. President Trump condemned these attacks. He said, quote, "Acts or threats of political violence of any kind have no place in the United States of America." Still, critics say President Trump's rhetoric doesn't help the situation, that all of the intended targets are people or a media organization that he has strongly criticized, like calling media the enemy of the people. But the president did have a softer tone at his latest rally last night, saying it's time we come together. He also asked the media to stop the negative coverage of him. Law enforcement told Fox News it's likely one person or group is responsible for these pipe bombs since they were all so similar. The New York City mayor called it an act of terror and said we will not give in to fear or intimidation. The FBI and local investigators are still working on this, and there's a lot we don't know yet, so stay tuned. On the same day, there were new calls for the nation to come together. The president signed bipartisan legislation into law yesterday. The issue? Dealing with the opioid epidemic in America. Lawmakers on both sides of the aisle in the House and Senate had easily voted for and passed this bill before it landed on the president's desk. It tries to do something about drug addiction through prevention, treatment, and recovery. For example, NPR reports it gives the green light for new government research to find new drugs for pain management that aren't as addictive as opioids. And it gives Medicaid patients more access to substance abuse treatment. There is now a new way to treat the flu. The FDA just approved the first one-time or single-dose pill to help ease symptoms of the flu and help you recover faster. It's different from the common treatment Tamiflu, since Tamiflu is supposed to be taken twice daily for 5 days, not just once. Time Health reports the new treatment is meant for people 12 and older and has to be taken within 48 hours of getting the flu. Health experts say this is not a replacement for the flu vaccine, that you should still get your flu shot, which of course can prevent you from getting the flu in the first place. A new report says it's time to try a new way to fight climate change. Instead of just having the option to use more sustainable energy sources, a leading scientific body says it's also time to try to suck carbon dioxide right out of the atmosphere and get rid of it or reuse it. The National Academies of Sciences, Engineering, and Medicine says the new method won't be easy. It needs massive investment from the government ASAP, but that there's a lot of potential there. Remember, CO2 stops heat from leaving the planet, and scientists say it contributes to global warming. A quick break now for our sponsor today. This week's episodes are brought to you by Quick Start. If you don't know, Quick Start offers organic snacks like protein bars and protein crackers made with cricket powder. But don't worry, you don't actually know the crickets are in there because they're in such a fine powder. It's a great source of protein without the chalky taste you usually get in protein bars. And get this, there are 0 refined sugars. That is a hard thing to find with most grab-and-go snacks. The other ingredients in the protein bars and crackers are all organic and plant-based, like seed butters, hemp, and dates. These are great, nutritious, tasty snacks for when you're on the run, and yes, they are paleo, keto, or just low-carb friendly. The other thing that's great about Quick Start is that their products are super sustainable. There's no waste with crickets, and they require a whole lot less water, feed, and land than meats. So head to quickstart.com and check out the flavors. They have chili chocolate, lemon lime, and more. Plus, you can get 20% off with promo code Newsworthy to try it out. That's quickstart.com. Use the coupon code Newsworthy for 20% off. Now, back to the news. Facebook just launched another political tool. This one is meant for candidates to talk directly to you on video. TechCrunch reports it's called Candidate Info, and it's meant to be vertical monologue videos for you to get to know your local, state, and federal political candidates. They can introduce themselves and explain their top priorities and qualifications. The videos will be available as part of an Election 2018 bookmark in the Facebook app, and you might even see some in your newsfeed starting as soon as next week. There's been a lot of controversy surrounding NBC News anchor Megyn Kelly this week. On her Today Show segment, she made comments about not understanding why blackface on Halloween is racist. She later apologized, and the NBC News chairman condemned her remarks. Variety reports her talent agency has now dropped her as a client, and she's reportedly in talks with NBC about giving her a different role and ending her morning news segment. This is not the first time, by the way, she made controversial statements about race. Speaking of NBC, it is just the latest news organization to launch a new online video streaming service, trying to reach audiences who have stopped watching TV news. Also, Apple TV is reportedly launching its upcoming TV subscription service in 100 countries right away. The information cites sources saying the plan is to launch the new TV service in the U.S. in the first half of next year, and then the app will go global by the end of 2019. The goal is likely to be competitive with services like Netflix, who already have a big international presence. Remember, Apple's service will mean Apple device owners can watch original programs for free. Uber has a secret. Bloomberg reports Uber has been using existing restaurants to launch newly branded virtual restaurants exclusive to the Uber Eats delivery service. Here's how it apparently works. Uber analyzes the data to figure out where there's demand for certain types of food in certain areas, and then partners with restaurants there to expand selections under a new name, just for the Uber Eats platform. So, for example, Uber realized one area wanted more gourmet burgers, so it worked with a restaurant to offer more types of burgers under a different name. But that restaurant apparently had so much success with Uber Eats that it's changing the name of its entire operation. It's also helped the growth of Uber Eats delivery service. And that's it for the main news today, but it's now time for Thing to Know Thursday, where a different expert explains a different thing to know every Thursday after the news. This week, you may have heard talk about the ex-NFL player Rae Carruth. He went to prison for ordering the murder of his pregnant girlfriend in a news story that shocked the sports world. And just on Monday, he was released after nearly 20 years behind bars. But there's also a good part of this story. Carruth's baby survived, and the grandmother caring for him has shown remarkable forgiveness. So here to talk about all the twists and turns of that story is the Charlotte Observer reporter who covered the national story for 2 decades, Scott Fowler. He's conducted dozens of exclusive interviews with the family, friends, lawyers, investigators, and even the killer behind the most notorious crime in Charlotte, North Carolina's history. Fowler is even part of a new podcast series all about it.
Delivered the baby, Chancellor Lee.
It's miraculous he survived. Sharika was in very bad shape when she came in.
Where tragedy meets a grandmother's love.
He has cerebral palsy because of the...
And that was a clip from that new podcast series called Carruth. So here's my conversation with Scott Fowler. Hi, Scott. Thank you so much for coming on The Newsworthy.
Thank you very much for having me.
What has it been like to cover the same story and a story like this for 19 years? Has this impacted your life?
Oh, no doubt about it. It really has. I've covered this story off and on for 19 years. I mean, when I began, I had 0 children, and now I have 4. So it has been a long journey for everyone involved. And what it really has, it has impacted my life, particularly Sandra and Chancellor Lee Adams, the grandmother raising Sharika's son, and now her disabled grandson, and just sort of the joy they have brought to everyone around them, including me. And that's why I think this story has fascinated me for a long time, not just because of the darkness of the murder and the conspiracy plot, but of the rays of sunlight that come through, and that is really in the person of Sandra and Chancellor Lee Adams.
What has your relationship been like with those two?
Well, I've seen them more often over the past 4 or 5 years, and certainly I wouldn't want to overstate it. We're not at each other's houses for Sunday dinner or anything, but they have come to trust me. And so I've seen them in a variety of circumstances. And what it's really shown me is just kind of a purity of love between the two of them. I mean, they adore each other. And it's just, love can be so complicated. But in their case, it's a very simple thing and a beautiful thing, really. And that, yes, I think that is kind of the reason I have stayed with the story so long, because if I was only interviewing the hitman who shot Sharika Adams 4 times, which I did do in a jailhouse interview for a very surreal 3.5 hours, that would be difficult to do that sort of thing every day. But when you put Sandra and Chancellor Lee into the equation, then, you always feel better coming out of seeing them than you do going in.
So let's talk a little bit about that jailhouse interview and what your interactions or maybe even relationship with Rae Carruth has become. What was that interview like with the hitman? And then how do you feel about Carruth getting out of prison, and will you interview him?
I have mixed feelings about Carruth getting out of prison. I've gone through this case with a lot of people, lawyers and such, and some. I think if the trial had been held in different circumstances, he might still be in prison for the rest of his life. In other places, he might have gone free. Carruth actually thinks, I believe, that it ended up about where it should have, being in jail for 19 years, although he never has admitted full responsibility for what occurred that night. As for the hitman, Van Brett Watkins, he, oddly enough, has received more forgiveness and has expressed more remorse to Sandra Adams than any of the other 3. And they actually have a little bit of a correspondence back and forth. The two of them, not all the time, but they write letters back and forth. And he's the one who actually pulled the trigger. And as far as Carruth, we have talked on the phone, only off the record so far. He wrote me a pretty introspective 5-page letter at one point about 6 months ago that I've excerpted in my podcast and in my stories. And sure, I'd like to interview him, but I'm not exactly holding my breath that it's going to happen.
What part of the story and the now podcast stands out to you the most? What's most memorable?
2 things probably, and we've mentioned them both a little bit, but Sandra and Chancellor, first of all, the sort of forgiveness. I couldn't forgive the person who did that, I do not believe, at least not as completely as she's been able to do. So that's an extraordinary part of the story, and I think part of the reason why people do subscribe to the podcast and come out feeling that they didn't just, they don't have to just take a bath because of all the murderous stuff in there, because of these Sandra and Chancellor Lee's attitudes. And the other part that stood out, honestly, was that interview in the jail with the hitman. It's rare you get access in that sort of situation. It took a long time to get it. And I honestly felt a little bit like Jodie Foster interviewing Hannibal Lecter back in those Silence of the Lambs movies. It was quite bizarre and unusual.
This story, of course, got more attention because Carruth is an ex-NFL player. But unfortunately, domestic violence is really a big problem. So, and in fact, October is Domestic Violence Awareness Month. So do you have more insight into the issue in general? And do you pay more attention to domestic violence issues now because of your 19 years covering a domestic violence story?
I sure do. And I really didn't understand the definition of domestic violence too well before I began covering this. And I wouldn't have originally told you, yes, Rae, this was a classic case of domestic violence with Rae Carruth and Sharika Adams, because he never touched her. He never hit her. It was not physical violence, but it was a very tumultuous relationship. I think, Sandra speaks about domestic violence to domestic violence victims and stuff, and believes it was very much a case of domestic violence. And I've certainly come to believe that too, not only because he conspired to murder his pregnant girlfriend, which of course is an absolutely horrific thing to do, but also because I think he manipulated her, mentally. He gave her a cell phone, but really because he wanted to be able to call her all the time. And, back in 1998, it was unusual to have a cell phone. So, yes, my definition of it has broadened, and I should add that I'm very proud in the podcast. We do have several nonprofit charitable sponsors that we have given time. Basically, during the podcast, you'll hear clips, from their good work. So we're trying to help a little bit as we can.
Of course, you can find a link to that new Carruth podcast series in today's show notes. That's also where you can read more about all the news we talked about today. Just go to thenewsworthy.com, click episodes, and look for today's date. Thank you so much for listening today. And remember, The Newsworthy is ready for you by 4 in the morning every weekday. So we will chat again tomorrow. Have a great day.